Military history is packed with supposedly perfect plans that fell apart on the battlefield. Yet no invasion has failed as quickly or as catastrophically as the vision Moscow imagined for this summer. On the Kremlin's maps, bold red lines targeted Slovian Kremursk and Zaporizhzhia for what they believed was a guaranteed win. Moscow prepared for months for this knockout punch, stockpiling ammunition by the trainload and sending huge mechanized forces to the front. They calculated that it was just a matter of time until Ukraine's defenses were pulverized by this onslaught of heavy armor. But on the ground in Ukraine, something is unfolding that terrifies Russian forces like never before. Ukraine did more than just survive this massive blow. Rising from the rubble, it unleashed a devastating counteroffensive, forcing the Russian army into a brutal impasse. This incredible reversal created a frontline breakthrough unseen since 2023, almost completely halting the supposedly unstoppable Russian advance. Oleksandr Syrskyi, Ukraine's top commander, confirmed this, noting that 480 square kilometers in the southeast and east have been retaken since late January. This number isn't merely a cold hard fact. 480 kilometers is the result of a systematic campaign to win back territory Russia occupied for months. 8 communities in the Dnipropetrovsk region were liberated, along with 4 more in the Zaporizhzhia region. A total of 12 villages were brought back under Ukrainian control, all while Russia was trying to push its own spring offensive. But the most significant detail from Syrskyi's statement was this: the territory was gained using coordinated attacks by airborne troops and nearby units. Essentially, Ukraine pounded Russian positions with drones before infantry and armored units moved in to clear out what was left. This was a calculated counterattack, not a reactive move, and its impact was shattering. An analysis by Agence France Presse using data from the Institute for the Study of War showed Russia advanced only 23 kilometers along the entire front in March. To give some perspective, that number was 319 kilometers in January. The advance dropped to 123 in February, then to nearly 0 in March. This marks the slowest progress seen since September 2023. A military with the world's biggest artillery arsenal, sacrificing over 1,000 troops daily and using tens of thousands of shells monthly, is now stalled. And there's one simple reason why. Ukraine's counterattack has put Russia on the defensive, shifting its focus away from its own offensive. President Zelensky based his assessment on his own intelligence as well as reports from British MI6. The front is in the best shape for Ukraine it has been in 10 months. And Zelensky's claim was more than just wishful thinking. It was supported by solid data. The Ukrainian armed forces successfully stopped Russia's planned March offensive. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, based in Washington, provided additional detail on this. The ISW's daily briefing explained that Ukraine's counterattacks toward Juliapol and Oleksandrivka are creating dilemmas for the Russian military command, which their already strained forces cannot manage. The term dilemma is key here because Russia is now effectively caught in a bind. They want to push on a Slovian Kremursk in the east, but they also have to commit forces to defend recently lost ground in the southeast. This was exactly Ukraine's strategy to disrupt Russia's own offensive, and it succeeded. However, we haven't gotten to the most dramatic part of the story, because Russian plans aren't the only thing crumbling at the front. The morale among Russian soldiers has also plummeted based on reports from the partisan resistance. Russian troops are wrecking their own equipment to avoid deployment to the front lines in Kostanka Donetsk. They're deliberately breaking engines and draining operational fluids from the vehicles. They damage electrical wiring and fuel systems, often just before a deployment. This isn't happening in isolation. This tactic is now common practice within a unit of Russia's 255th Motorized Rifle Regiment. Even the commanders are reluctant to enforce discipline since they know what awaits their soldiers. The dread of fighting on the front lines is now stronger than the fear of punishment. This is not just a one-off problem, it's a systemic failure. There is another facet to this breakdown, and it is perhaps the most surprising. Some young adults who were born and grew up in Russia are now fighting for Ukraine against the Putin regime. A young Russian man named Reagan abandoned his comfortable European life to join the Free Russia Legion. The Bucha massacre was his turning point. "I realized this was wrong and that I could assist the Ukrainian people somehow," he says, explaining that he works as an electronic warfare expert. He locates Russian troop positions and passes this intelligence on to Ukrainian commanders. The Legion has a straightforward mission to dismantle the Putin regime, but their strategy is founded on the principle of 1,000 small cuts. Each individual plays a part, and eventually the breaking point is reached. Roughly 3,000 Russian volunteers are fighting for the Ukrainian army. That number by itself paints a stark picture of the moral decay inside Russia. And the daily casualty reports only strengthen this narrative. On April 6th, according to Ukraine's high command, Russia lost 940 soldiers. The Ukrainian side estimates that Russia's total personnel losses have climbed to around 134,490 since the conflict began. These statistics serve as clear evidence of a military in decline, and that's just scratching the surface of the issue. If you appreciate deep dives like this from TGN, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content. Now let's get back to it. Russia's manpower shortage is proving to be much worse than initially thought, and its ability to replenish these losses is diminishing quickly. Russia is suffering about 1,000 troop casualties every day. Meanwhile, its training facilities can only handle between 30,000 and 40,000 recruits a month. Essentially, the entire system is balanced on a razor's edge. What's even more concerning is that the training for new soldiers has been cut down to just 5 days. In stark contrast, Ukraine gives its new recruits 51 days of preparation. The official training requirement of 4 months is now just a formality in Russia. It doesn't happen in practice. Convicts are getting only 10 to 15 days of training. Foreign mercenaries from places like Nepal, Iraq, and Africa are being thrown into combat without a basic grasp of the Russian language. One Burundian national was transported to a military base completely unaware that he had even signed a service contract. It's a clear sign of a military that is critically short on personnel. But Russia's use of foreign fighters extends even further. The involvement of North Korean soldiers represents one of the grimmest aspects of this conflict. Starting in late 2024, more than 14,000 North Korean troops were dispatched to Russia, where they met a terrible fate. Information from South Korea's intelligence agency indicates that about 6,000 of them have been either killed or injured. That represents almost half of the entire contingent that was sent. An analysis from the British Ministry of Defense suggests that most of these losses happened during high-risk infantry assaults that were known to be deadly. Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un is lauding the supposed heroism of these troops and has commissioned a monument in their honor in Pyongyang. The harsh truth, however, is that North Korean forces are being systematically decimated on the battlefields in Russia. This highlights how even the foreign aid Russia is getting isn't enough to stop the heavy losses at the front. The system for recruiting volunteers is also falling apart. By the start of 2026, signing bonuses had soared to 3 million rubles, which is about $30,000. That's a 400% jump in a single year. But the financial incentive isn't effective anymore as too many caskets have come home. People now understand that 3 million rubles is worthless to someone who's deceased. The available pool of potential draftees has all but vanished. Enlistment numbers are down by 22% from this time in 2025. The military barracks are becoming vacant. Every one of these data points indicates the same conclusion: Putin's objectives for 2026 are unraveling. The ambition to capture Sloviansk and Kramatorsk in the east is now out of reach. In the south, the strategy to push towards Zaporizhzhia has completely failed. Instead of capturing more land, Russia is actually ceding ground. After a visit to the Pokrovsk area, Syrskyi commanded more ammunition and resources be sent to bolster the Ukrainian forces. Ukraine is successfully maintaining its defensive positions while also broadening its counterattacks. Now let's look at where this conflict is headed. Powerful indicators suggest that Ukraine is poised to do much more than simply defeat Russia's spring campaign. The circumstances Putin may confront this summer could be significantly worse than just a failed spring offensive. To start, let's examine the role of his allies. Iran, which has been a key provider of weapons to Russia during the conflict, is currently consumed by its own internal struggles. Actions taken by the U.S.-Israeli coalition against Iran have seriously hampered the flow of Shahed drones and ballistic missiles to Russia. Putin is close to losing his most dependable source for weaponry, and Iran's diminished capacity is just one piece of his collapsing network of alliances. In Syria, Assad has been overthrown, and in Venezuela, Maduro has been pushed to the margins. Russia failed to offer any significant military aid to these nations, despite having signed strategic partnership agreements with them. This turn of events delivers a stark warning to Putin's few remaining partners. Russia's pledge of security is proving to be just an empty promise. His last two significant allies are China and North Korea. We've already discussed what North Korea has brought to the table: thousands of soldiers for the front and millions of artillery rounds. However, this support comes at a steep price. The 50% casualty rate for North Korean troops calls into question how long Pyongyang will be willing to continue this involvement. China, on the other hand, is approaching the situation with a different strategy. China is holding back on arming Russia directly, rattled by the formidable military power shown by the U.S. and Israel in Iran. The Iran operation proved the U.S. can take out command hubs, missile sites, and fortified bunkers with pinpoint accuracy. Xi Jinping is well aware that any military action toward Taiwan would invite a similar response. Every one of China's 1,550 ballistic missile launchers is a top priority on the U.S. target list. The Iran incident served as another stark warning for Xi. America's strategy is to neutralize the source, not just the weapon. This means going after the launch system's control centers and the people in charge. Beijing has clearly absorbed this message and is now cautiously avoiding any overt backing of Moscow. In essence, Putin is feeling the pressure from every allied corner. This development directly weakens Russia's combat strength on the front. Their already sluggish advance could grind to a halt if Iranian aid is cut. The second crucial problem is their critical shortage of soldiers. With Russia losing 1,000 troops per day, training is now cut to 5 days, and the volunteer recruitment system has completely failed. Maintaining an offensive through the summer is arithmetically impossible. If Ukraine successfully removes over 40,000 Russian soldiers a month, the advantage on the battlefield will swing decisively in Ukraine's favor within 6 months. The third element is Ukraine's clear technological edge. A Guardian report from Kyiv indicates that robotic ground vehicles now manage 90% of the Ukrainian military's logistics. In January, Ukrainian forces conducted an unprecedented 7,000 missions utilizing these ground-based drones. Robots armed with remote-operated machine guns and grenade launchers can secure a location independently for 45 days. Last summer, a kamikaze ground vehicle with 200 kilograms of explosives went 20 kilometers to destroy a school occupied by Russian forces. A drone pilot in the 25th Airborne Brigade put the situation this way. The front line is a scene from Terminator. A robotic vehicle rolls up on your position and you are utterly powerless. For the first time ever, Russian soldiers have surrendered to an armed ground robot. This is not a movie. This is the reality of the 2026 battlefield. The Third Corps commander Andrei Bitki noted that Ukraine is approaching a new revolution building on its success with unmanned aerial vehicles. He predicted these ground-based robotic platforms will utterly reshape warfare and supplant a large portion of the soldiers. And Ukraine is not just keeping this technology for its own fight. Zelensky has secured 10-year defense pacts with several Gulf nations, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar. These pacts cover the provision of affordable Ukrainian drones to Gulf states to counter Iran's Shahed kamikaze drones. Ukraine has become a weapons supplier while in the very midst of a war. This reality completely contradicts Putin's narrative of a nation on the verge of failure. The fourth and likely most vital factor is the morale in Ukraine. Zelensky's leadership, the army's determination, and the people's defiance have not faltered. On the contrary, they have become even more resolute. Zelensky spoke before the British Parliament. He was put forward for the Nobel Peace Prize. In worldwide surveys, he achieved the highest approval of all foreign leaders. When you consider all these factors together, the resulting picture is clear. This summer, Putin might be compelled to withdraw a large contingent of his army from Ukraine. This is not a guess. It is an arithmetical certainty. At that juncture, Putin faces two choices: either announce a second mass draft or completely cede the momentum to Ukraine. And at this exact moment, the shadow of 2022 looms large. The declaration of a partial draft in September 2022 caused the greatest societal shock in Russia's modern era. When Putin revealed that 300,000 reservists would be activated, a current of panic shot through the country. A study by The Bell using migration data from 70 countries showed at least 650,000 Russian citizens fled after February 2022 and did not come back. The bulk of them were young, educated professionals. The backlash inside Russia was also fierce, with over 1,300 arrested during anti-war protests in major cities. Initially, Putin dismissed those who left as a natural purge of society and as traitors. But the brain drain that followed landed another blow on the Russian economy, which was already strained by the conflict. Now a second mobilization could recreate this entire episode on a much more catastrophic level. Because in 2022, many still held on to the belief the war would be over quickly. By 2026, no one has such illusions. Announcing a second draft would unleash a much greater exodus, a far deeper economic crisis, and much fiercer social backlash than the first. With an economy already facing a 3.4 trillion ruble deficit and a labor crisis, such an action could induce a societal and economic heart attack. If a draft isn't called, the current volunteer force is about to disintegrate. Both options spell disaster for Putin, and the most worrying sign might be emerging from within Russia itself. Public backing for the war is quietly and consistently disappearing. Based on a February 2026 poll from the independent Levada Center, public backing for Russia's military campaign in Ukraine has fallen to 72.2%. But the most revealing part of that survey concerned the possibility of peace talks. In February 2026, a new high of 67.2% of people surveyed said it was time to open peace talks. On the other hand, the portion of people who wanted the conflict to go on sank to just 24.3%. That marks the lowest number recorded since this question was first introduced. You could see this as the Kremlin starting to float the idea of peace through its own pollsters. Of course, these results should be viewed with skepticism. With Russia's crackdown on free expression making anti-war statements a crime and state media control, it's hard to gauge the real public mood, but the underlying pattern is unmistakable. Support is eroding war, weariness is mounting, and the push for peace is gaining strength. Putin has no way to reverse this trend. The critical question is how much longer the Kremlin can sustain this internal conflict. A 3 million ruble bonus isn't swaying anyone these days. Over the next few weeks, this front will become the focus, as Ukraine's counteroffensive represents more than just taking back territory. It demonstrates that Putin's military has hit its material manpower and political breaking points, and after those points are passed, there's no going back. This analysis was brought to you by TGN. If you're looking to grasp the larger strategy beyond the actual fighting, this is the place to be. Remember to give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and drop your own take in the comments below. We'll catch you in the next one.